Everybody, Bob Buchanan here. We're going to get started in probably just less than a minute. Wait and just give everybody a chance to join. All right. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. Again, my name is Bob Buchanan. I am the EVP of Sales and Marketing with RapidScale, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about disaster recovery. We're doing these on a monthly cadence, really targeting our existing customer base and just trying to provide some level of education with what's happening in the market, and also with maybe how we might be able to help. Yes, I lead the sales team. Yes, we would love you to certainly take advantage of more offerings from RapidScale, but I promise you this isn't a sales pitch. This is more about real life scenarios, what we're seeing in the market, how technology is maturing. And today we've got a special guest. I'd like to welcome Christian von Treskow to the call with Zerto. Welcome, Christian.
Thanks so much, Bob. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man, we go way back, so I appreciate you joining me, and this will be fun. Guys, just like every one of these, we record them, and we'll send a copy of the recording and the presentation out to all registered attendees. So we appreciate it, and with that, we'll go ahead and get right into it. So we'll start off with just an interesting comment around DR and risk, because this is all about risk, right? How do we prevent the unexpected? Nearly half of the companies that lose their data through a disaster never reopen, and 90% are out of business within 2 years. And this was from a research study at the University of Texas Center for Research Information Systems. That's pretty darn compelling. And you know, to think about that for a minute, it really kind of tells you how much businesses today are relying on mission critical applications to really function. And any type of uninterrupted, unplanned outage has a massive impact. And that's going to be the theme, right? It's risk mitigation, and there's multiple ways to get that done. But let's get into, you know, Zerto. There's a partnership, a relationship that exists. RapidScale leverages many technology partners to provide our comprehensive kind of IT as a service offerings, our managed cloud offerings. And one of those strategic partners is Zerto. Christian, if you wouldn't mind, give us an idea, high level, who is Zerto and what do you guys do?
Yeah, Bob, really appreciate it. So as Bob mentioned, my name is Christian von Treskow. I'm the cloud sales manager at Zerto. And essentially my primary responsibility is working with our most strategic service provider partners like RapidScale, who are leveraging our software to deliver a service. For some of you on the phone, Zerto might be a new name, so I usually like to talk about the name. It's unusual. It's actually a play on words. If you sandwich the words zero and RTO together, RTO standing for Recovery Time Objective, you get the name Zerto. We are a leading provider of enterprise disaster recovery and IT resilience management software. So in terms of our relationship with RapidScale, we're simply providing the underlying enablement software, so namely the replication, the orchestration, and the automation. And RapidScale is providing everything else in the scenario, namely the target compute, target storage, any type of recovery services, management, bandwidth, et cetera, would be coming from RapidScale. We were established in 2009. We have dual headquarters in both Boston and Israel. All of our sales and operations is based out of Boston. All of our development happens overseas in Israel. We do have employee headcount across the world. Specifically here in the US, we have headcount in every major NFL city. Our first product release was Zerto Virtual Replication 1.0. We were actually unveiled on the floor of VMworld that year, where we took home Best of Show and VMworld Gold. And it's really been a rocket ship ride ever since. We have well over 700 employees, and we've doubled our revenue and customer base year over year since inception.
Hey, man, that's a great overview. Do me a favor. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, right? And hopefully you can't see how you didn't tell how old I was in my picture. You look like a younger looking guy than me. But at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, there's always been multiple ways to manage DR from a technology perspective. There's obviously the business side, but really, I've seen storage to storage replication. I've seen application level replication at the database level, whether you're mirroring or doing some type of log shipping. But what is it that gives Zerto its secret sauce? Get into the go tech on us for a few minutes, if you will.
Yeah, no, great question, and you're right. I mean, if you look out there today and you read some of these publications, there's literally 100 different products that are saying they do the same thing. So it's definitely very, very complicated. I think one thing that really makes us unique is we were the first hypervisor-based solution on the market, right? And that means we interact directly with vCenter if it's a VMware customer, or System Center if it's a Hyper-V customer. And this means we're a virtual aware solution. And we really allow your customers, our joint customers, to leverage their existing investments in their infrastructure. Customers spend a lot of money virtualizing their infrastructures because they want to take advantage of features like DRS or HA or vMotion, et cetera. And Zerto allows for that investment, right? We're a storage agnostic solution. I think that's what's really made us so popular within the service provider community. At the last VMworld, I think we ran into each other at Bob. There were over 89 different storage vendors presenting at VMworld. And so for a service provider like RapidScale, it's almost impossible for you to back end 89 different storage solutions to accommodate SAN-to-SAN replication. So with Zerto, by replicating at the hypervisor layer, we are a storage agnostic solution, meaning it doesn't matter what type of storage solution your potential customers are using or what type of storage platform RapidScale may choose to migrate to in the future. We're occurring several layers above that. So for us, and specifically speaking to the service provider community, we've really unlocked the doors and the gates for you to be able to market your services to a wider range of customers without worrying what type of storage they may be tied to.
Oh, the storage agnostic piece is huge, right? It's not only huge for the service providers, but if I'm in the corporate environment and maybe I'm going through different levels of M&A, I've got maybe some heterogeneous type environments, and well, that isn't ideal. It obviously happens. That's IT, right? Being able to use a technology that can help us get there across multiple platforms versus, I invested in EMC and I've got to use maybe their native technology, Recover Point, for example. Really good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's a lot of value. Before we move off this topic, though, one of the things that we commonly hear from our customers is, I have traditional backup. It's working fine. That helps. Certainly, you can't argue with that. They're certainly leveraging some level of best practice. They may be doing it themselves. They may be leveraging us. But talk to us a little bit about the traditional backup scenario, which I think of as data survivability, versus what Zerto has to offer, which I think leads to more data recovery, if you will. So give us some insight there.
That's a really good one, Bob, and you might have to cut me off here. I think we could go an hour on just the difference between backup and DR alone, right? And for me, it's really becoming an ever more gray area, right? So over the years, if you've had a chance to listen to Zerto and attend any of our speeches or events, we've really kind of focused and marketed ourselves as really a true disaster recovery platform. But I would say over our last few releases and over the last few years, we've really started to gray that difference between backup and DR with some of our features like journal file level restore, right, which allows for the more granular restore of Windows and now Linux files and folders. We've also extended our journaling capabilities from 5 to 30 days. So for me, even though we do kind of focus on the disaster recovery market, we've definitely started to introduce what I would consider more backup-esque features. And for a lot of the smaller organizations that I deal with, oftentimes due to budgetary constraints or the size of their IT organization, a lot of the times backup is their DR strategy, right? I think a lot of it starts to depend on what are their primary use cases for recovery? What do they envision having to recover the most often? Is it simply files, folders, emails, maybe a lost PowerPoint presentation? Or is that IT organization more concerned with full data center failover or full application recovery? And then you start to get down into the weeds with discussions around recovery time objectives or recovery point objectives. And so for me, while there's a ton of different products out there that can move data from A to B, it's how efficient this movement of data needs to be. But even more importantly, what does that recovery process need to look like at the secondary location? And that's where you really start to separate these products from each other.
Hey, man, that's awesome. That's a great response. I appreciate it. I'll let the audience know, and I should have said this at the outset. If you have a question, you have access to chat via the webinar. For the GoToMeeting, you can send in a question, and we'll try and get those answered at the end. Otherwise, you can email me directly, and we'll get you the answers between Christian and myself. So, next slide here. I think when people think of DR, Christian, I think they think, oh my gosh, I need to prepare myself for the worst case scenario, whether it's Hurricane Irma, which, by the way, actually, it's real. We actually picked up some business out of the Houston market last year for that exact, that exact type of event. But it's more than the natural disasters. It's actually the higher probability type stuff are things that are isolated, like maybe a power failure. And I've lived through some of this, right? I've been doing this about 14 years, and I've seen UPS environments, even in the most highly redundant data center environments, fail. I've seen, hardware failures. Obviously, you're trying to build redundancy into your system architecture, which I would argue is a best practice before you even think about DR. But at the same time, mechanical equipment does fail. And then obviously network outages. There's a probability at some point in time, especially if you're isolated to a single network provider, you've got risk. Software failures, and then my favorite, human error. True story. I actually worked years ago in this business where a customer actually plugged in a colo environment two separate power cables that went into two separate power supplies to a critical database server into the same power distribution unit, same PDU within the cabinet. And they lost the PDU, took the whole thing down, they're offline. These guys had a 100% SLA to their customers, and I can tell you it wasn't pretty. And then obviously there's everything else. Before we just move away, I give you a couple examples. And I gotta believe you've been doing this a long time, Christian. What have you seen?
Oh, like you, Bob, I think I've seen everything, right? I mean, we do a lot of these presentations across the country, but it really doesn't matter whether I'm in Florida or Texas or even somewhere in the middle part of the country. Most people seem to associate downtime with Mother Nature, right? With weather-related events, and for the majority of us, depending on the part of the country we're in, those are simply just not that major of a concern, right? So, for me, the biggest causes of downtime, to your point, are definitely those mundane operational events, right? Things that could affect any of us at any time. And the scary part is, compared to 5 years ago, where downtime maybe was just a little blip on the radar, now if you're an organization and you have downtime, it very well may be front page news, right? So we're definitely in different times in that sense. The most recent one that sticks out to mind is we have a very large data center here in downtown San Francisco. It's a water-cooled data center. Yes, we still do see quite a few of those. And they had a water main burst, right? And they had a new employee that was not trained properly, did not know where the emergency shutoff valve was for the water main. And it took them well over 2 hours to cut that water off and essentially shut down that data center for more than 24 hours. So this was a major, major disruption, and we had several hosting providers within that facility that were affected that leveraged Zerto to cut over from a secondary facility. So to your point, I've seen some pretty funky stuff, but that's the most recent one.
Yeah, and then moving on, what is the impact? What are the dangers of downtime? And we listed out a few here, right? But in my experience, in being in the sales environment, the easiest thing to quote DR. There's also a lot of window shopping because I think we're moving from this environment where DR was considered an insurance policy, right? Maybe the larger enterprises had to do it. They had to have a plan. Whether it was tested and validated is another story. It often could be financially difficult to justify because it was seen as an insurance policy. But today, with more and more apps moving online, if those applications again are simply not available, I mean, what are the employees that are impacted? Productivity loss, right? If you can't actually process payroll, if you can't take orders, damage reputation, your brand, right? And especially in the service provider space and in the commercial market. Revenue loss, obviously a huge one. Obviously impacting financial performance, and then other expenses and other impacts. But the biggest thing that I've learned is, organizations have to do a business impact analysis to understand if these critical applications were offline or my data is offline, what is the impact to the business? And then you start driving to, well, do I actually need backups because I can't afford to be down a day or two? Or do I actually need to be implementing a solution where I can recover in a few hours and only can lose a certain amount of data? And that drives the discussion towards these type of solutions. So, just some things to think about. I don't think this is anything new. We probably all can relate, but it's a refresher to say, look, if you don't have, and by the way, if you're on the call and you don't have these type of concerns, backup might just be fine. But if these are real concerns, the good news is with Zerto and with managed by RapidScale, these are the type of solutions that are more cost effective today than ever. So I really would like your input here, Christian, and here's where I'm driving at. If you think about DR and what's happened, and I just mentioned the enterprise, and maybe you're a highly regulated organization. You've got to meet certain compliances. Maybe you're dealing with large customers who have very stringent service level agreements. Whatever it may be, if you go back even a decade, and maybe you don't even have to go back that far, it's amazing what was happening, right? You're looking at organizations writing data primarily to tape. That tape went to an off-site location. The Iron Mountain business, for example, was so big. I still remember the trucks coming to the data center every single day, and you know what? There's organizations that are still using that technology. It's amazing. But then the tapes, if there's a disaster, maybe that organization is reserving some level of compute somewhere in another data center on some type of large mainframe or mid-range environment. They bring the tapes back and they pray. They pray that they can restore, and they've got some of their data. And that's actually, it was a really expensive endeavor, and the actual failure rate was really high, and it was also very difficult to test. And we're moving really away from that world, and it's creating tremendous opportunity down market. The mid-market customers, because not only the apps moving online, they're all highly virtualized. And that's giving us the flexibility, the agility to leverage a technology like Zerto. But I'd love you to comment on this. I think if I'm correct, a customer can go to Zerto Direct and buy a perpetual license and simply have Zerto in their environment. But just like the marketplace is consuming technology differently versus traditional IT, they then can leverage service providers. And give me your take on the market and what you're seeing.
Absolutely. So far and away, the fastest growing business unit at Zerto is our service provider community. So just to take a step back, Zerto is 100% software driven, and there's essentially two different ways we can be consumed. We obviously support the industry standard enterprise perpetual licensing model. So if a customer has their own 2 data centers, or they have their own on-site and possibly a colo at a service provider, they're definitely free to outright buy Zerto. They pay that upfront CapEx expenditure, and then every year after that, they would simply just have an uplift for maintenance and support. But in terms of our service providers like RapidScale, we have a different licensing agreement in place. It's more of a subscription licensing agreement, where essentially we meter your usage of Zerto, and then we meter and bill you monthly. This allows RapidScale to include the cost of Zerto licensing into a DR as a service, along with everything else you need as a customer, namely target storage, reserve compute, managed services, connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. For me, this slide is a really powerful one, because if I look at disaster recovery, there's really 3 options a customer has. They can either do it themselves, they can consume it as a service through a RapidScale, or they can do nothing at all, right? And unfortunately, we're still seeing too much of the third one, right, which is the nothing at all. And I think your stat that you pulled up, and there's a million of them, right, that talk to what the risk is there. And to me, for an organization not to have a robust DR strategy in place these days is really akin to rolling the dice with the livelihood of your business and your employees, right? I can't think of too many businesses that aren't relying on data, or where data isn't their business, right? So to not have the disaster recovery these days is a scary proposition. So when you start to look at those other 2 options, you essentially talk about, do I do this myself, or do I consume it as a service through a service provider? And I'll be very honest. My focus is working through service providers, so I'm very biased. But for me, it's really a no-brainer. And the top one there really, really says it all: better functionality for less cost. And I think that would appeal to everybody on this call, right? So if you look at having to build out your own disaster recovery secondary location, you're looking at pretty much building out a secondary production environment. Yes, it can be watered down in some sense of the words, but all those same components are necessary. So first off, you have to go and scout the location. So rack, ping, power, cooling, data center location, security, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have to obviously go and purchase all the different components of that environment. So storage, switching, hosts, all that stuff. So when you're all said and done, you're looking at a very, very expensive CapEx expenditure with a very unpredictable result versus consuming it as a service through a provider where you may only be looking at paying for some very cost-effective target disk, some licensing on a per VM basis, and then possibly a little bit of compute, all wrapped around some guaranteed SLAs around recovery with experts who do this on a daily basis. So for me, it's really a no-brainer. We can definitely walk through the rest of these on the list, but for me, it really comes to that first point. For most people, they're very cost-conscious when it comes to disaster recovery, and when you consume it as a service through an organization like RapidScale, you're simply going to get a much better offering at a lower price point.
Man, that's great. I appreciate it. You couldn't have said it better myself. So that leads us into RapidScale's offering, and again, maybe this is the slight sales pitch, but just to give you an overview of what we're doing. As Christian mentioned, they're a software company. They rely on service providers because they're not necessarily a service provider company in the sense that they're managing this experience, right? So RapidScale has obviously multiple cloud platforms globally, and in any one of those platforms, we can run production, or we can simply be a target, or we can be both. So the point here is, guys, is if your production environment is not with RapidScale, it's sitting at another provider. If it's sitting in your four walls of your corporate environment, or if it's sitting at RapidScale, we can leverage the RapidScale Cloud Recovery or DR as a Service solution. It's not only being able to leverage it in multiple type use cases there, it's us managing, helping you decide what is the RTO and the RTO based on the business outcomes and the level of risk you're willing or not willing to accept. And then us managing basically that asynchronous replication process, making sure that the replicated VMs that are in that pool are replicating to target appropriately and it's working. And then in the event of a disaster, ensuring that we're managing that process to help you recover in a timely manner. And that's really what the experience of our team delivers to enable you to do that. Couple different features, right? Just to point out, right? All this is done in tier 3 data centers, SC 16 certs. As you mentioned, Christian, application hypervisor independent. We, in this case, are running NetApp all flash encrypted storage. However, it doesn't really matter. We don't care, as you mentioned, what the production environment looks like if it's somewhere else. We're primarily a VMware hypervisor shop. 100% SLA on the infrastructure, including the network. And as a standard, we're looking at 4-hour RTO, near real-time RPO, and those can be modified if necessary. One of the beauties of us is, hey, we unlimited bandwidth inbound and outbound, so we don't really charge for it. We've got multiple 10 gig connections in these data centers, and the bandwidth is included in the cost and bundled in. We don't charge, and that's unique in the industry. Again, multiple recovery points, and we'll allow you to test twice a year, and if you need to pass compliance or do that for your internal audits. Again, block level replication and some of the features that the Zerto software offers. Quick customer case study, guys. We just mentioned leveraging multiple use cases where maybe the customer has production with us, maybe they don't. In this case, they do. And it's a fully managed production environment for a manufacturing kind of supply chain company down in Texas. Won't release the customer name, but these guys are into like different types of piping. And it's an industry that I admit I'm not an expert in. But if you think about aluminum piping and being in that level of that business from a distribution standpoint and selling wholesale, that's what they do. They've got 40 locations, US, and they're an international business, and all of their infrastructure is with us. And then we're doing replication from one data center to another data center and managing that for them, obviously, in the event of a disaster. That's real-time synchronization, about 20 terabytes of data, again, looking for less than 4-hour RTO. And this is obviously not a wireline document. This is just an overview of maybe a logical diagram of, on the left side, you might see the Texas data center where production resides, and you'll see some of the different components in the technology stack that we support, right? Everything from encrypted SSD drives on the NetApp to looking at the VM infrastructure and running ESXi into the Citrix bundle, and in this case that was for a desktop as a service environment along with their production servers, and then obviously looking at to the right side, secondary data center, in this case our Sterling, Virginia facility, and then in the middle right you see the virtual replication being managed through the Zerto mechanism. And again, high level, but just wanted to give you a conceptual understanding of what this looks like, and this is a use case that's very common for us. So, Christian, I'm about at the end of the presentation. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to summarize. I will say this: we're constantly looking to educate the marketplace as well as our existing customers on the comprehensive portfolio that is available within RapidScale. When I think about cloud and I think about the technologies that are available, I think about speed to market. I think about efficiencies. I think about basically cost optimization. All the reasons why I would go, but one of the biggest drivers is mitigating risk. And this is, again, just to kind of recap, this is exactly why these services are becoming popular. There was lockout in years past because the price was just prohibitive, and with technologies and the partnership between companies like RapidScale and Zerto, they're very much available to the SMB and to the mid-market. And I'll pause and see if you have anything to say as we conclude.
No, absolutely, Bob. This was awesome. I really appreciate you allowing me to participate today. RapidScale is a really, really exciting partner for us here at Zerto, right? We have a really rich ecosystem. We have over 350 cloud service providers around the world that are leveraging Zerto to deliver service. But in my opinion, RapidScale really, really has differentiated themselves in the way they've taken our platform and really made it their own. So obviously, we've been working closely with the RapidScale team for several years now. So I can definitely say that you guys are subscribing to our best practices, but what you guys have done is far beyond that, right? So to be able to work with a nimble, very, very sharp team, leveraging best of breed technology to deliver the types of solutions you guys are, it's a really, really exciting partnership for us. So thank you.
Awesome. We had one question come in. Question was, are we able to leverage Zerto to replicate internationally, for example, to our platforms in Hong Kong or Amsterdam? And the answer to that question is yes. Any one of the 5 platforms, soon to be 6, that we manage and operate globally, we can offer these services. So great question. If you've got a requirement to be, whether production's in abroad or you need DR to be abroad, we can definitely do that. So last thing I'll say to our clients, and what we're offering here is you join these webinars and you've registered and you want to add additional service with us. All services month free on a 24-month agreement, and if you do a DRAS, we'll get that extended to 2 months. We'd love to have you give us a try, and love to even get the engagement and the conversation going to maybe do some discovery and understand what your business needs are and see if we're a good fit. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you again, Christian, and everyone have a great day.